It's my pleasure to discuss how many of our grantees have been meeting the challenges of the pandemic. On our panel today, we have Colleen Cotter, who is the Executive Director of the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland. We also have Jim Cook, who serves as the Executive Director of Idaho Legal Aid Services. Jesse Nicholson, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the Southern Minnesota Regional Legal Services, and Maria Thomas Jones, who's Chief Executive Officer of Legal Aid of Northwest Texas. To get started, I'd like to go around the panel and discuss with them how they've been impacted by the pandemic and how they had to pivot to work remotely at the start of the pandemic and how it's evolved over the past several months. So with that, let's get started. Jesse, how did it work for you in Minnesota?
It worked very well in the sense that the Legal Services Corporation technology grant helped us to move very quickly to remote work, very, very quickly. It was almost seamless. And we were able to get all of the equipment that people needed so that when they got started in their remote work environments, it was very smooth. The other thing I'd like to mention is that we regional programs in Minnesota were very fortunate to get some of the CARES Act funding that came to us through the Minnesota Supreme Court. And so with that funding, we were able to do a couple things. First of all, we were able to partner with community organizations to set up more than 270 legal kiosks throughout Minnesota, so that there are legal kiosks sitting in all 87 counties of Minnesota so that people can go in and access services, participate in court hearings and things like that. The other thing we're able to do with those funds, we're able to buy a bus that we're referring to as the Justice Bus, that will be able to provide access to our more remote communities throughout southern Minnesota. The buses should be up and running sometime next month. So that's how we were able to move forward in an environment that's been a bit of a challenge, obviously.
And have you seen a change in the mix of your cases and an increase in the number of clients?
We have seen not so much a change. We're seeing more clients in certain practice areas, such as orders for protection, harassment orders, lots of visitation issues, children that are staying with one parent and then they go visit the other parent who then doesn't want to return that child because of the exposure to COVID, that kind of thing. Education law issues, we're seeing more of those kinds of issues, particularly as relates to students with special needs. Distance learning does not lend itself very well to students with special needs, needless to say. And another set of cases that we're seeing, believe it or not, are naturalization cases. We give you a quick example. We represented an elderly man who, was on SSI. Then he contracted COVID, was in the intensive care unit for weeks on weeks. His naturalization hearing had to be postponed several times. He got his benefits terminated because, he wasn't a citizen. And so finally, when he was able to be released from the hospital, we were able to get the naturalization service ceremony scheduled really quickly here, and he became a naturalized citizen and was able to get back on the SSI benefits. So we're seeing strange cases like that in that arena as well.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Maria, what are you seeing in your part of Texas?
Thank you, Lynn. We cover about 114 counties in Northwest, and we represent an area that is both rural and urban, and we have about 30 locations. We had to transition and have in remote status kind of now about 290 staff. And again, I reiterate and echo what Jesse said. Without the technology funding, we could not have accelerated all those folks to the remote. And so we are seeing a couple challenges. Some of our staff, some of their duties do not really lend themselves to being remote, and how to be creative around that has been a challenge. Supporting our workers as well has become very, very important. Not only are they doing work, but they have kids at home. They may have exposures or have COVID themselves, and how to keep them safe. And then we also want to make sure that if they are coming into any of our facilities, that we are enhancing cleaning and equipment, making sure that we reduce the risk. With regard to clients, We have seen, of course, the issues that normally we see, but we are seeing, of course, some housing and eviction matters that have definitely increased. We have seen some benefits and unemployment. We have done a lot of outreach to train our staff and the community on unemployment benefits and economic stability issues. We're seeing some powers of attorneys, advanced directives and wills during this pandemic. And then again, I would reiterate what Jesse says in terms of the family law issues. We are seeing those as well.
And Maria, how many staff do you have working remotely from how many different areas or offices did you have?
Well, we have about 30 locations spread out through the 114 the 114 counties in our service area. All of them are remote work. We have a protocol that basically says you are to be remote unless it's essential that you come in and do something. If you have to check the mail or meet a client that can't meet you anywhere else and doesn't have the technology for you to send documents, receive documents, get documents signed, then we're very careful about how we bring those people in. Both the staff and the clients. We talk a little bit about some of our applicants and clients who have to be, have to use the virtual hearing and may not have technology, or the technology and internet is not reliable, and having to set up, computers and to allow them to participate. So it's a combination, but we are remote, 100% remote, unless you have to be essentially in the office. So we have about 293, I think, people who are working remote. Some come in and we try to maintain the social distance, not too many people in the office. And so our managers are challenged with making sure that they keep the folks safe. They're managing from afar, which has its own challenges as well, and making sure we get the work done as well.
Great, thank you very much. Both Jesse and Maria have referenced the technology grants, and what they're referring to is when LSC received $50 million in CARES Act money, we carved out about $2.5 million of those funds and had a competition amongst our grantees who might need some extra technology help to get set up to work remotely. So for those of you who weren't aware of that, that's the pot of money that they're referring to. Jim, how did it work for you in Idaho?
Well, first off, I want to say I appreciate the opportunity to come here today and speak. We are a very different program, a much smaller program than the other two that have talked so far. And I just want to set kind of our background. So Idaho is a large state. We're about 83,000 square miles in the Intermountain West. And we have in 2018, 19, and 20, either been first or tied for first in population growth by a percentage of our population. So we are traditionally a sleepy state that's now bursting at the seams. And the way we serve the state historically is through 7 regional service offices. And we've augmented those with a domestic violence, a senior and housing hotlines to help us serve rural folks. Our model historically was everybody in the office. And I historically did not like remote work policies or even that concept. And of course, the pandemic threw that upside down. Using both PPP and LSC funds, that we were able to go very quickly to a completely remote work model. And I am really surprised at how well that has worked. We ended up in 2020 actually processing more intakes than we did the prior year and serving more clients. And I'm very proud of our staff for that. What we did, we ended up trying to, number one, prioritize the safety of our staff. So even when offices were open, they were all closed to the public since the pandemic started. But even when open, we gave every employee the right to decide if they were going to work remotely or in the office. They still had to get their work done, but we were very cognizant. We have a lot of senior staff who have underlying health conditions, and the pandemic was very bad in certain areas of the state of Idaho. So we wanted to give them that flexibility. One of the biggest things that we've learned during the pandemic is a lot of what our attorneys have been doing is just helping the public keep up with these, what we would consider very fast changes in the judicial system. When we had the CARES Act moratorium and then the CDC moratorium, half the battle was just letting our client community know those things are around, or even letting them know that all of a sudden the state has rent money. So we had to be more adaptable and more fast thinking than historically we do when we practice law in the state of Idaho.
Right. And by way of comparison, as Maria said, she has about 293 staff in that 114 county area. And I know Jesse has about 110 people working for her. So in the entire state of Idaho, what is your service area? How many staff do you have dedicated to that?
So our population is about 1.8 million, and we have 45 staff, and about half of those are attorneys. Each of our offices serves between 4 and 10 surrounding counties.
So great. Yeah. So just to give folks out in the audience some kind of context as to who's serving what populations. Colleen, how is it working in Cleveland?
Well, in Cleveland, very similar story to those you just heard from Jim, Maria, and Jesse. The Legal Aid Society of Cleveland serves a 5-county area in Northeast Ohio, so we're much more compact than my colleagues' organizations. We have 108 staff members, 64 of whom are attorneys. And we also went all virtual very quickly. And we were able to do that because we had over the years invested in our technology foundation. And I can't imagine being able to continue to serve clients during a pandemic if we had not kept up on technology, moved to the cloud. But the grant from the Legal Services Corporation with the CARES money made a huge difference in terms of being able to buy very not exciting technology, laptops for folks and hotspots for folks, the things that you don't need when everyone is working in the office, but you certainly need when you have 108 offices. The other thing that we've struggled with is because we are not isolated, we have to work with all of the court systems. We do not have a unified court system in Ohio. We have 25 different courts in our 5 counties, and every court operates differently. Some courts are still very paper focused and in-person focused. Others are virtual and e-filing. Different government agencies still require paper. So in spite of the fact that we really are quite virtual, we have about 20% of our staff on any given day need to go to the office because, like Maria, our policy is you need to go to the office when your job requires that you go to the office. And sometimes you just have to handle that paper or meet with that person in person, social distance with masks and cleaning to keep people safe. The other things that we didn't really think about until the pandemic started were things like, how do you notarize documents? So online notary systems vary state by state, who can do them, what's the system? So, and we didn't have an e-notary capacity, but we got it quickly. And increased security for our technology. When everybody is working from their home, it's a different type of thinking about technology security than if everyone is in an office, and that requires time and investment. So it's been a huge change and we've learned a lot. And our staff has really been remarkable.
Right. And this is for Jim and Colleen. Have you seen a difference in a mix of cases similar to what Maria and Jesse have seen? So Colleen?
Yeah, we have seen a significant increase in housing cases, landlord-tenant cases, and in employment and unemployment cases. And I think it was Jim who mentioned the need to get the word out about those changes to the client community. And I agree, that has been a huge challenge in all of those ways that we were present in the community before the pandemic. Those events aren't happening and we wouldn't go to them if they were. So getting the word out in a virtual way about those, but huge increase in those areas of employment, unemployment, and landlord-tenant issues.
Right. Jim, a difference in cases?
Yes, there is. what happened in Idaho is our courts effectively shut down for a period of time. And so we reassigned all of our attorneys who were not already working on an advice line to one of the advice lines. And then we created a COVID-19 legal advice line that took some additional case types. And so we put everybody on the barricades of the advice lines to help clients. And a few things that happened. We had a very large increase in employment cases, up 51%. At one point, we were 200% up on advanced directives. Our wills were far up. Our housing, of course, like everybody else, was up. Our evictions were up about 24%. Interesting, though, I actually, before this meeting, was looking at our CSR reports for 19 and 20, and I noticed our consumer cases went down 92% in 2020. I'm still trying to figure that out. And another interesting thing was our tribal work really dropped in 2020. And I think a lot of that is because the tribal courts really struggled to stay open during the pandemic. And so we're still kind of digesting the results, but it was very interesting. There was a bigger variety of cases overall, in part because we created the COVID-19 line.
Thank you. You know, everybody has mentioned that they have had an increase in housing cases, and we've seen that at an aggregate level at LSC. So, for example, under the grant activity reporting that we received from 2019, housing cases or eviction cases were about 17% of the overall caseload nationwide. But just with 2 rounds of COVID-19 reporting, we see that that is up to about 31%. And of course, unemployment insurance was negligible, and that is now about 18% with the COVID reporting. But I want to pivot and focus a little bit more on the eviction work that you all are doing. It's in the news constantly. It is something that is taking up a lot of your energies. And I would appreciate it if each of you could talk about what eviction moratoria your state is encountering, whether it's a CDC or an individual state moratorium, and what are you seeing in the world of eviction in your area? So Maria, let's start with you.
Thank you, Lynn. And I know you heard from Chief Justice Heck. He talked a little bit about the Supreme Court orders, so I won't go through all of that, but there is a moratorium. And of course, we have the CDC moratorium. At the beginning of the pandemic, there were individual orders from different counties and cities to make sure that we kept up on. Things were different throughout our service area, and that was a big challenge in terms of trying to stay up to date. And then, as someone mentioned, making sure our client community and our organizations, community organizations that we partner with, knew and kept up to date with that. So what we're seeing now is, you know, we have those moratoriums in place. We don't know how long they're going to be extended, but in the state of Texas, as was previously mentioned by Justice Heck, that we have an eviction assistance team that we have in place, and that was made possible by special funding, where we actually have lawyers for the very first time there in the court to help those that are facing evictions. And to take applications and to negotiate with the landlord if possible. We're hoping to spread that to other locations, but it's going to require some collaboration and cooperation with the judges and with the clerks to make sure that we are able to efficiently and effectively utilize the system that we've put into place. Our housing practice team stays on top of and up to date with the latest orders. They're looking for trends. They're collaborating statewide and regionally. And we are trying to keep up with the rental assistance program, because we know that evictions and rental assistance kind of go together for the solution. We have seen an increase in online intakes, which is different for us. The online intakes have increased tremendously, and we have a telephone legal assistance and application. It's a part of our access to our services, and we've extended the hours and hired additional people. We have been using our social media in a better and more efficient and effective way, doing digital advertising in targeted areas, such as in the low income communities. We may have a digital marketing, not a marketing, but an advertisement like a PSA running in a 7-Eleven or some other store to talk to them about if you need eviction assistance. So we've used Facebook and YouTube to reach out to do community education and that kind of thing. We have a statewide eviction portal, which is new, that provides a lot of good information, and that's a collaboration with the legal service providers in the state. We have been training our clients how to, as I said, use Zoom and set up remote access if they don't have access within our offices. We have the laptops and the hotspots, so we are mobile and can go where needed. Our outreach with regard to our volunteers, as you know, staff attorneys can't handle everything. So our pro bono volunteer attorneys have stepped up and gone to, instead of in-person clinics, we have done some things that are virtual and telephone, so that the volunteers can continue providing services and emphasizing and amplifying the assistance. And so we've also done clinics for essential workers who may need powers of attorneys, advanced directives, and wills, and those kinds of things. So those are some of the interesting things that we've done to kind of make sure the eviction and the COVID is being addressed.
Great, thank you very much. Jesse, how about with you?
Well, Minnesota's governor, Governor Tim Walz, has implemented a statewide eviction moratorium, and that's been in place since the spring, and he renews it every month pursuant to the state legislative process. And so that's been helpful. So we're not seeing as many evictions right now, but we're waiting for the ball to drop, obviously. We are seeing some instances where landlords sort of invent reasons to evict someone. There are 3 narrow exceptions in the governor's order whereby tenants can be evicted. And so these landlords, pile it on when they can. Fortunately, we've been training volunteer attorneys to help, take some of that load, especially in instances where it's really a matter of advice and counsel, those kind of cases. But we do see some very interesting and strange situations happen. I'll give you a quick example. There was a woman, an 82-year-old woman who was living in an assisted living facility. She all of a sudden had to start taking dialysis 3 days a week. And so on the 3rd day of the week that she went for her appointment, she comes back to the facility and they locked her out. They wouldn't let her back in. And the reason for that, they were saying, was because she would expose the other residents to COVID possibly. No discussion about having her moved elsewhere in the premises or anything like that. She contacted our offices and such, and so we had to go in on an emergency order to get a lockout petition to get her back into the facility, and then negotiated with the owners to allow her to live elsewhere in the premises and isolated from the other residents. You would have think that they could have done something like that in the first place, but they weren't very creative, and so exposed this lady to that sort of situation. In any case, the other thing that we've done is that to make sure that our services are accessible to some of the newer groups in our service area. We're getting refugees and immigrants from various places. And so the most recent new group that's come in are from Myanmar. And so last year when the pandemic hit, we decided we needed to right away hire some staff from that community that could help us to provide education and initiatives for that community, because they didn't know anything about American laws. And needless to say, landlords were taking advantage of the fact that they didn't know anything about the laws and stuff. And so we hired 2 staff, and that's been extremely helpful to us to serve that population.
So, well, that's some amazing work. Thank you very much. Jim, how about in Idaho?
First off, our biggest challenge initially was making sure we had the pipeline set up so we could still get the clients. So fortunately, we had in 2019 redone our intake system so it was more centralized and more efficient. And we had also purchased phone systems that allowed us to work remotely. Obviously, we didn't anticipate what was going to happen, but it worked out well for us. We also, in 2020, created a new online intake system. So our intakes were up about 122% on the online system. But in terms of housing, it's interesting what Jesse just said. I think as a rule, because of the pandemic, tenants in Idaho were more willing to put up with more nonsense from landlords because they felt like they couldn't move during the pandemic. At some point, you couldn't even really leave your house. The volume went up, and so it provided some opportunities for some creative lawyering by our attorneys. One of the things that they did early on during the CARES Act moratorium was our housing attorneys were filing amicus briefs in pro se cases where we were trying to educate the judges about the protections afforded by the CARES Act moratorium. And we ended up doing those in cases around the state, and I think it was generally successful in educating judges. We can't do that in the CDC moratorium because it's more driven by the tenant to claim that. Another thing we did was we partnered with the ACLU and claimed that Idaho's landlord-tenant statute, the eviction statute, violated Idaho's constitution because it took away the right for a tenant to have a jury trial. And the court ruled in our favor, and that gave us, our tenant clients, a lot more leverage because at the time jury trials had been suspended in the state of Idaho. So we've been able to use that to work out better arrangements for tenants. And I think the other thing was we tried to be a bit more dynamic. We had our housing law practice group chair do a whole bunch of very quick eviction videos that we posted online, and then we advertised on social media. They weren't professional. They were done very quickly, but the idea was get something out and talk about it right away. We had to be more nimble than we would normally be as a law firm. So I was very proud of the aggregate of all of those efforts.
Great. And are you seeing in Idaho an increase because the CDC moratorium is only an eviction defense, not a similar, unlike what Minnesota has, which is just a blanket moratorium with some exceptions?
Yeah, I don't have to worry about keeping track of the various moratoriums. There's only the CDC here. And unfortunately, but in fact, I was talking to a housing law attorney before this call, and he was saying that one of his biggest problems is we're getting so many clients who call after the egg is scrambled, after they've been evicted. They didn't even know about the moratorium until they called us a week later or 2 weeks later, that the word has not gotten out. And so a big part of ours is just educating folks, especially in rural counties, that this is out there and it's an option. We also have a lot of challenges with judges wanting different approaches to how it's to be handled. Some say you can't raise it in court. It has to have been filed in advance. One told us it had to be filed before the eviction lawsuit was filed. And so we've had very distinct approaches by judges. And so there's been an education component as part of our casework.
Great, thank you. Colleen, it's a little bit different in Cleveland. Although your service area is 5 counties, Cleveland is one of the few jurisdictions in the country that actually has a right to counsel on eviction cases. So tell us how you're handling it at your program.
Yeah, Lynn, and it's really fortunate we have that because Ohio does not have a moratorium, and nor do we have local moratoria to prevent evictions at this point. The right to counsel in Cleveland took effect on July 1st of 2020. So the timing of it could not have been better in terms of being able to be ready to address the needs of people facing eviction as a result of the pandemic. So July, we onboarded a bunch of new staff members in part to meet the needs of right to counsel, did all of that remotely. Which was in itself quite a challenge. At the same time, the court, so Cleveland Housing Court, was going fully virtual. And so figuring out how to do court via Zoom, helping our client community figure out how to participate in court via Zoom, and representing tenants in eviction cases. The right to counsel in Cleveland applies to a relatively narrow population, households where there are children in the household and the family has income at or below 100% of the federal poverty guidelines. So it's pretty low. Before pandemic numbers, that would have been about a third of evictions filed in the city. So we have been, working really hard. We actually, next week, we're deploying Chromebooks for clients to use so that they can participate in Zoom hearings. And we have been incredibly successful. I think, I'm figuring in a few years, we'll be looking back at what worked and what didn't to help the community survive the pandemic. And one of the things will be keeping people in their homes, keeping people safe. And we, in our first 6 months of the Right to Counsel program, have prevented 93% of evictions.
Wow.
It's really astounding, 93%. We actually have a larger number of cases that are pending because we've been able to raise the CDC defense, the CDC moratorium defense to the eviction. So we have a lot of cases still pending. We're helping people access the tenant assistance that's available through the CARES Act, which has been incredibly helpful in negotiating settlements. And but the future, as Jesse said, the shoe is going to drop. We're going to see even more evictions going forward as the pandemic lingers and people lose jobs. I do want to share a very brief story. I actually, for the first time in my career, got an email thank you from a landlord. And this email, this landlord had a situation where he was trying to evict a tenant who was a formerly homeless man who had a gunshot wound to the head and had really struggled to get his life back together, got an apartment, but then fell behind on the rent as a result of the pandemic. And the landlord was just done and shows up and is told, well, wait a minute, this tenant might be eligible for right to counsel. We appear on every court docket to be available for tenants who don't call us in advance. And the magistrate delayed the hearing and sent the tenant to us for representation. Then the hearing was delayed again. The landlord's really mad. Why is the tenant getting this lawyer and delaying things? I just want my apartment back. But we were able to sort this out with these delays to actually get the landlord paid with the CARES Act tenant assistance money available that a partner is providing. And our tenant, our client, was able to secure a job, a regular, solid job, get his 5 children out of foster care and have them living with him. And the landlord wrote me this email to thank me for the incredible job that our staff attorney did in representing this tenant. And in the end, the landlord was really happy that the tenant had a lawyer. We got the access to the federal assistance that the tenant was really struggling to figure out how to access. And the tenant and his children are now in their home living safely, and he has a job. That's the value of legal assistance that we can provide. And especially during a pandemic, it's so critical.
My gosh, that's a great story. So how does it work in the rest of your service area where you just have the CDC moratorium and not the right to counsel?
It's a mess. It is a mess, I will say. And it's a mess in a number of ways. One, every court operates differently. Some courts you have to appear in person. You can't even participate virtually. It's hard to participate virtually, but not having that option is really terrible, especially for people with underlying conditions. There are inconsistent, as Jim said, inconsistent application of the CDC moratorium defenses that are available, inconsistent distribution of the tenant assistance that's available. The difference between where you have everybody working together, the housing court, the agencies with tenant assistance available and legal aid all working together and increased resources to represent folks, we're going to have so much better housing stability in the city of Cleveland than in these in the suburbs and in the other counties. We don't have the resources to represent everybody, and people are getting evicted left and right in spite of the CDC moratorium.
So the courts in Ohio, they're 100% open, 100% docket, or is it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction?
It varies absolutely from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. It totally depends. And we have a system of municipal courts. So we have a lot of courts in the state of Ohio, and every court can operate as they choose. There's no unification of the court system. So some courts you absolutely have to show up, and others you have to participate by Zoom, and it totally depends. Which is very hard for our client communities. Very hard. It's hard enough for our lawyers to remember and figure all this out because it also changes so frequently. But our justice system in the United States is stretched to the breaking point, I think, at this point in time.
Well, all of your stories have been incredible. Your work is amazing. So as we wrap up this panel, I have a question for each of you. One, throughout this 10-month marathon that you're running at a sprinter's pace, to quote a colleague of mine, what are you most proud of and what keeps you up at night? So Jesse, let's start with you.
Well, I think the thing I'm most proud of is having staff make the concerted effort to remain fully engaged in providing the services that they provide for the client community. That's wonderful to see that. I'm really proud of the staff, particularly as we move to the legal server case management system in September. So putting that on top of all the work that they're doing, they've done a remarkable job in sort of keeping a positive attitude while all that's unfolding, and then in keeping focused on the client needs. What keeps me up at night? I would say, Lynn, it's probably just the opposite of what I just said. How long can staff remain fully engaged like this in the climate that we're living in? That's the thing that just keeps me, nervous and keeps me up at night.
Great, thank you. Jim?
A couple things I'm really proud about. One is that we really took the pandemic seriously and we did everything possible to protect our staff. That from the very beginning was job one, and our clients. But I think if you had said to me, look, you're going to go from serving every client in person or telephonically from the office to having everybody work remotely in 3 weeks, a year ago, I would have just said it's not possible. But the fact that we completely changed our delivery model after more than 50 years based in the office, I'm really proud of that. With not only did our staff do that, but they were able to actually increase the number of people we helped. So I'm really proud of that. And I think it really is, as Jesse said, when you have people that are engaged and passionate about the mission. And so I am so grateful to our people for that. My biggest concern is the continued population growth in our state. Last year, Ada County, which is our most populous county, home prices went up 18%. That's 1 year, and that's on top of year after year of prior home increases. And we are getting to the point here that I feel like we're becoming more like Seattle or some of the other coastal cities in California, where the locals are being priced out of the communities they grew up in. And that causes me great concern that because people's incomes in Idaho have not matched the increases in the cost of living. So that is a great concern to me. And another thing is I'm very worried about Idaho Legal Aid's long-term ability to continue to represent the client community when our attorney, the number of attorneys we have is not increasing consistent with the population increases. And so we've always believed, look, you got to get the most out of every dollar we get to benefit the clients. But there's only so many efficiency enhancements you can do before you need more attorneys. And that's my concern is what are we going to do in 5 years or 10 years when instead of 1.8, we have 2.2 million people and our budget's similar. So that is also a long-term concern for me.
Great, thank you. Maria?
I would just echo what some of the other folks have said, and I am very, very proud of the dedication, flexibility, and the creativity of the Landwidth staff and our volunteers that work alongside us in providing the services despite their own personal challenges as well. They are very dedicated to doing that. And in addition, I'm very proud of the eviction assistance project that we put together. We're hoping, there was a little bit of hesitancy regarding having us in the court, and so we were able to work through some of those issues and make it a positive experience that we hope to export into other communities and within our service area. The biggest challenge, I think, is the end of the eviction moratoriums and what that's going to really mean to us at that point in time. I think someone had mentioned, or there was a little bit of a comment about possibly, once this all happens, landlords are just going to not renew. They're just going to not renew leases. And that's a big concern also, or they take the money and now that the money is no longer there, we're back in the same situation. So it's going to be a problem that keeps me up at night. And also the next tsunami of cases that may come through involving consumer and education and other issues that are just going to blossom should the people get evicted and the pandemic continue and people lose jobs.
Great. Colleen, last word for you.
So I definitely would echo what my colleagues have said. The resilience of the staff, my colleagues at the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland, has been beautiful throughout the pandemic. And I think we all need to consider that they've shown resilience and they've been creative and dedicated in spite of the incredible stress that we all are under living through the pandemic. So that it inspires me every day. I would say that is what I am most proud of. And like Maria, I'm very concerned about the future need of our client community. We've seen a decrease in our consumer cases and foreclosure cases, but we know it's coming. We know that our client community, the foreclosures have not yet increased, but they will. And our client community needs to be dealing with the things that are very, very basic right now: money and shelter. And who has time and energy to be dealing with those consumer issues? And but they will need to deal with those issues of student loans and bankruptcies. And so addressing those needs at the same time as continuing increase in evictions and all of the other work that we do. And then just, we consider ourselves part of the system that brings hope to our community, that solves problems with our client community. And it keeps me up at night. Will the problems be so big that we can't help solve them? And I hope we can. That's what we're about. That's what we've always done. But the problems are becoming pretty insurmountable.
Well, thank you all. I think the work that you and your staffs are doing is inspiring, and it does give us hope that, we can make progress moving forward. So thank you all for participating in today's panel and for your continued commitment to your client community.